Hello, friends. Namaskar. We want to thank you for all your support, that you are subscribing our channel and for sharing and liking our videos. And we hope that we will continue to enjoy your great love and support and encouragement. Thank you so much. Today we want to speak about a very interesting topic. It is holistic approach to mental health. And we will hear what Maharishi Ayurveda can tell us about how to have a very good mental health. So today we have a special guest for you. It is Dr. Robert Schneider. He is a well-known scientist, physician, and an educator, and a leader in integrative medicine. He did his postgraduate training in internal medicine and hypertension at the University of Michigan Medical School, USA. Dr. Schneider is a specialist in preventive medicine and preventive cardiology. Beginning in 1984, Dr. Schneider was one of the first physicians in the United States to practice, teach, and research Maharishi Ayurveda. He has great contributions in the research of Maharishi Ayurveda. And he has been a consultant to the National Institute of Health, Center for Disease Control and Prevention, Presidential Commission on Complementary and Alternative Medicines, and the U.S. Congress's Prevention Coalition. This is a very brief introduction about him, but I'm sure there is a lot more to say about him. But due to our time constraint, let us welcome him to this webinar session. A very warm welcome, Dr. Schneider, and thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Dr. Richa. Pleasure to be here with you and the audience today.
Yeah. So I think we will start with the session. And here I have a question for you. How will you define the total holistic mental health as per Maharishi Ayurveda?
Yes, for thousands of years, Ayurveda has been talking about the holistic approach to health. Ayurveda means the total knowledge of health and life. And more recently, in recent decades, Maharishi, Mahesh Yogi, has explained and elaborated and brought this understanding of a holistic health to its most complete understanding. And in this complete understanding, there are 4 domains of mental health. First, there's the innermost self, the transcendental self, or the spiritual level of oneself, the innermost level. Then the second is our mind, that which thinks, that which feels, that which decides, that which intuits. It's non-physical, but definitely there. The third level is our physical bodies, our physiology. Modern medicine has described how our physiology affects our state of mind, what we eat, what we breathe, the chemicals in our air and the atmosphere. All of those affect our physiology, and that affects our psychology. And then the fourth level is our environment, our social environment, our physical environment, our geographic environment. The old-fashioned understanding of mental health is it relates to only one of those 4 domains, the mind. And there are many approaches for the mind-only, talk therapy, for example. But in this expanded perspective of Maharishi Ayurveda, each of these domains affects mental health. One's connection with one's inner self, one's balance connection, one's balance and level of mind, of course, but the level of balance in a relationship or connection with one's body and one's environment. So this is you could say, the four-dimensional perspective on total mental health that Maharishi Ayurveda gives us.
That's great. And what would you say if one was to lose this connection, and what happens when you lose this mental health, and what are the consequences?
The consequences are not just theoretical. The consequences of loss of connection are very practical and have been especially dramatic in this past year. During this COVID pandemic, there's been a very high degree of isolation during this period.
Yeah.
There's been physical isolation due to measures to prevent the pandemic. And this physical isolation has caused social isolation, contributed to psychological isolation, and has contributed to an epidemic that's come out of the pandemic. Modern medical authorities are now talking about the epidemic of isolation, stress, and depression and despair during this time. Actually, one of the top medical journals had a lead title in one of their articles calling this the age of despair. And sadly, that's due to the isolation, or we could say loss of connection, between several of these levels. Again, there's been a very obvious isolation or loss of connection with our social environment, with our relationship with friends, family, and people we work with in a very concrete way. Then there's been a loss of connection with our environment, the larger community around us. In some cases, a loss of connection with our natural environment. And then there are deeper levels of loss of connection, but I think those are very obvious ones during this pandemic period that illustrate this principle. Fortunately, Maharishi Ayurveda gives 10 steps to restore connection and restore wholeness of mental health in its body of knowledge and practices.
That's very interesting. So, can you tell us more about these 10 steps of holistic restoration?
Yes, it'd be a delight to do that. These 10 steps are originally described in the classic Ayurvedic literature in the textbook of Ayurveda called Charak Samhita as the 10 steps for reversal of aging, the 10 steps for creation of ideal mental health, and the 10 steps for creation of ideal health overall. These 10 steps cover the most concrete, most material levels of those domains that we've talked about, and they go to the subtler and finally the most subtle levels. They go from managing our physical environment to managing our physiological environment, means our bodies, to managing our mental environment, means our minds, and to managing the connection with our spiritual environment, the innermost self. We could say on the more material level, which is as important as all the other levels, but only one part of the whole picture, is managing our physiology. And the first step to managing our physiology is don't get tired. Don't get exhausted. To balance our levels of rest and activity, because exhaustion is the first step of depletion, is the first step of isolating from our source of energy. It's overusing the resources that we have. And sleep is a very important part of this first step. There was a recent study showing that lack of sleep or short quantity of sleep, less than 6 hours, as an extreme example of short sleep, or low quality of sleep, insomnia, is associated with depression and mental and other mental health disorders, and even associated with dementia in later life. Those who sleep shorter, too short, or have low quality of sleep actually get more mental health and brain disorders later on in life. So modern medicine corroborates this first principle of balance your rest and activity. The second step, once you're managing that, is to manage your diet and digestion. I know you may have had previous shows on the Ayurvedic approach to diet and digestion, so I won't go into that in great detail, but I will mention that modern medicine has been corroborating this principle in recent years. This idea of a diet that's high in vegetables, fruits, legumes, and nuts, and whole foods generally has been supported by research in modern medicine. Some people call it the Mediterranean type diet. Some people call it the plant-based diet. But it's very much in accord with the general principles of whole diet prescribed by and recommended by Maharishi Ayurveda. The third, fourth, and fifth principles have to do with managing your mind more directly. The first two were about managing your body. The next three are about managing your mind. And that is managing your levels of anxiety, which relates in Ayurvedic terms to vata, aggravation on the mental level. Managing your level of anger, which corresponds in Ayurveda to pitta, or the fire principle, active in one's mind, which could be overactive and aggravated, leading to anger. The third principle in this series is to manage your level of inactivity, or put that in a positive way, to be perseverant, to be active, to be disciplined, because the opposite of that is, in Ayurvedic term, a kapha, aggravation, which is associated with slowness, dullness, inactivity, and depression. So these are the three big mental disorders: anxiety, anger, and depression, which are so common in our age of despair, as some people call it, especially during this pandemic period. And Ayurveda gives very specific recommendations to balance these doshas and their expression in one's mind. But actually all 10 of these affect each other. So one could say, how do you do that? Or maybe I'll leave that for a little later, how you balance each of these three. But let me give you just an overview and then of these 10, and then we can go into more detail as you wish. Number 6 is social relationships. We talked about the domain of the social environment and how we have such an isolation, being cut off. Of course, video conferencing helps a great deal, but in very real human terms, we've had this experience of being cut off to a large extent from our social world and our social relationships. And this is important to restore for total mental health in real, concrete human ways: kindness, compassion, touch, emotional touch, and physical touch. The next point is is another dimension of interacting with our social world and our world at large, and how we act, not just in a receiving way, but in a giving way. Ayurveda talks about giving charity, not just to support charities. Of course, supporting charities is a wonderful thing to do. But supporting or giving to others not only supports the receiver, but it supports the giver. So by giving to others in an altruistic, charitable way, one actually changes one's own psychology. One gets out of one's self in a way. One gets out of one's head in a concrete way. But one extends one's awareness, one extends one's activities, one extends one's intentions and concerns to the outer world and expands. That's expanding. And that's a technique for mental health. Number 8, 9 have to do with the innermost dimensions of our sphere of health, of our levels of connection. These have to do with our innermost or spiritual self. The spiritual level is described by every major tradition in the world, in every part of the world. And in Ayurvedic terms, this is called the level of the innermost self level. In Sanskrit, it's called Atma, the universal, immortal self, the universal self that's beyond the physical levels and beyond the mental levels, that long-lasting self, that unbounded self. And this level, one should first understand that it's there, and the textbooks of every major tradition talk about this level, and especially Ayurveda, and Ayurveda contains the science of yoga. Yoga also contains Ayurveda. They're both part of each other. So from this terminology of yoga, it's union with one's innermost self, and to understand that's even possible, and to have that as a goal in life, and what the implications of that are. The implications of union with one's expanded, innermost, quiet level of self. On a physical level, there are changes in one's brain waves and changes in one's neurochemicals, neurotransmitters. And this union can be done with meditation, particularly transcendental meditation, and the yoga asana prescribed and recommended by Maharishi Ayurveda and Maharishi Yoga Asana program. These are all methods that one first needs to know exist, and to know the benefits of, and that inspires one for the next step, which is actually acting to practice those technologies. First is understanding them, and second is practicing them. And that gives the experience of one's big self, you can say, one's expanded self, one's quiet, serene, calm, stable core. And this experience is the deepest experience that one can have, because one also experiences that one's core is also the center, or rather the basis of the rest of the universe. The laws of nature that govern the whole universe are the same laws of nature that govern oneself, one's physiology, one's mind, and experiencing their quiet, deep level of source within us is the same as is the source of everything else. So that experience changes the brain. That experience changes one's outlook in life. That experience gives us perspective. That experience gives us wisdom, which complements and works with all the other 8 levels that we've described so far. And that was the 9th step. And then the 10th step is manage your time. The Ayurvedic texts talk about managing your time and place. That means, in the end, that's really what you can manage the most, is your time and what you do with your time. So manage your time according to your values, to your highest values, and according to your priorities. And if you would like 9 priorities with which to manage your time, then Ayurveda, particularly Maharishi Ayurveda, gives these other 9 priorities. Manage your environment in the ways that we've talked about today. Manage your physiology in the ways that we've talked about today. Manage your psychology in the ways we've talked about. And then manage the connection to your innermost self. Those are the priorities that Ayurveda suggests. And if you do that, if you manage your time and your activities, manage what you do, but not overwork, manage your rest in the ways that we've talked about that today, then both modern scientific research and the ancient Ayurvedic texts describe the result of that, which is happiness, fulfillment, long life, ideal mental health, which goes along with ideal physical health and social health and environmental health. So there you have the overview, Dr. Richa.
That was very fascinating, Doctor. It was very nice to hear these things from you. And you are right. We have already discussed some like sleep and diet and nutrition in our earlier webinars. But some like the concept of giving, they are very special. Giving not just charity, but giving anything, like giving love, giving respect, giving encouragement, giving happiness. So it really brings that inner peace to oneself. Giving anything to anyone, even giving some space and time to your spouse, that also helps. And it is a very nice concept indeed that you brought today for everyone. And of course, the other concepts, the deeper ones of yoga, of meditation, it is very nice. And anyone who would like to learn that, it will be great. But there are also ways of connecting with nature, with music, with art. So all these, they help our inner self to connect with the outer nature. And it helps to build that understanding that we are not alone, that nature is within us and we are a part of a whole, of this whole nature and of the whole world. So there is no need to feel isolated or alone or feel that we are, away from our dear ones. We are all always connected deeply within ourselves from inside. So thank you for bringing all these concepts to us. So I think we are short of time now, but I would just like to ask you one small practical question before we end this wonderful session. It is about anger management, because some people are really facing this issue and some people have it in them that they get angry and anxious very quickly. Do you have some tip for that, to control that? Sometimes we get instantly angry over something. Can you tell us something about that?
Yes. So these three of anger, anxiety, and depression are all states of mind that are associated with imbalances in core mind-body principles. And Ayurveda talks about these mind-body principles as the doshas, vata, pitta, and kapha. So one wants to balance those doshas using these technologies that are available in the physiological, psychological, and spiritual domains. On the physical level, one can help to balance these doshas and their expressions in one's emotional mind using the other principles, using rest and activity in their balance, using diet according to the dosha need, using herbal food supplements that balance the appropriate dosha. And then also even the awareness, the knowledge. Our theme today can be summarized into knowledge and practice, these two. So the knowledge that this is a kind of imbalance due to one's psychophysiological state at the moment, even that gives some distance, gives some separation. Actually, sometimes separation is useful. In this case, well, that's not really my most innermost self, because I know my innermost self, when I transcend and experience that, is a state of settledness, of calmness, is a state of fulfillment, of state of balance. And then I know that's really who I am, but now I'm having this experience. Even that distance creates some balance. It's like a Vaidya takes the pulse of the client, or one can take feel one's own pulse using Maharishi pulse reading. Then one's attention is there. That's some level of imbalance in my mind body. And that attention also has its own settling influence. So in brief, the knowledge has value in what's going on. And then also the knowledge that I can use these other steps, like what can I give to this person, as you just said. We're all feeling upset. Maybe in a certain situation, some people are feeling upset. Then you can say, okay, let me try the principle of giving. Let me try the principle of compassion. Let me try the principle of respect. Let me try the principle of empathy and understanding. And that not only applies to people in your environment, but in the end, each of these 10 apply to oneself. So let me apply the principle of compassion to myself, the principle of respect, the principle of love. So the general idea is that each of these three, if one is talking about how to balance these three, you can use the other 7 to balance these 3.
Very nice. So, this was a very special webinar. Thank you so much for being with us, Dr. Schneider. And I certainly hope that we will have you with us again. And I thank all my friends for being with us today and for liking and subscribing us. See you all next time. Have a great day and a great year ahead. Thank you. Namaskar.
All the best.